Don't drink it. That's what I should have screamed. Instead, I watched him lift the glass, a slow-motion nightmare only I could see. Arthur Sterling, billionaire, about to toast his doom. See, I knew what she'd slipped in, a little white something extra in his Cabernet. He didn't. The arrogant bastard. Now the cops will tell you I intervened. Saved his life. Nah. He had no clue the woman he was about to sign his life away to was about to sign his death warrant. What he really didn't know, my kindness was about to cost her everything. And he'd owe me big. Arthur Sterling adjusted the platinum cufflink on his left wrist, checking his reflection in the darkened window of the obsidian room. At 58, Arthur still cut an impressive figure. He had the kind of jawline that suggested stubbornness, and the kind of eyes that suggested he had seen too many spreadsheets and not enough sunsets. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped snow against the glass, but inside the restaurant was a sanctuary of warm amber light, velvet booths, and the soft clinking of silver against china. It was the kind of place where a bottle of wine cost more than a Honda Civic, and the staff was trained to be invisible until summoned. "You're nervous," a voice teased. Arthur turned. Veronica Vane was sliding into the booth opposite him. If the restaurant was beautiful, Veronica was devastating. 32 years old, with hair like spun gold and a smile that could convince a man to sign away his soul. Which was, ironically, exactly what was on the agenda for tonight. "I'm not nervous," Arthur lied, signaling the sommelier. "Just eager. It's a big night." Veronica reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Her nails were painted a deep blood red. "It is. Tonight marks 6 months, Arthur. And the beginning of everything else." Watching them from the service station was Helen Jenkins. Helen was 24, tired, and currently trying to mentally calculate if her tips tonight would cover the rent hike on her studio apartment in the sketchy part of Cicero. She smoothed her black apron, pushing a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. To men like Arthur Sterling, Helen was part of the furniture. She was a pair of hands that delivered plates and removed crumbs. "Table 4 looks intense," whispered David, the bartender, as he polished a glass. "That's Sterling, the software guy, worth a mint." "He looks lonely," Helen murmured, her eyes lingering on Arthur, "even with her sitting right there." "That's Veronica Vane," David scoffed. "She's been on the arm of 3 different CEOs in the last 5 years. Rumor is the last one had a skiing accident in Aspen just before the wedding." Helen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty service door. She watched as Arthur laughed at something Veronica said, his face lighting up with a vulnerability that made him look younger, softer. He looked like a man who was starving for affection and had finally been thrown a scrap of meat. "I'll take the table," Helen said quietly. "It's Mario's section," David warned. "Mario is on a smoke break." "Again." "I'll take it." Helen grabbed the water pitcher and moved toward table 4. As she approached, she practiced her invisibility. The trick was to serve from the left, clear from the right, and never ever make eye contact unless spoken to. "So the lawyers said the trust transfer needs your signature by midnight to be valid for this fiscal year," Veronica was saying. Her voice was low, silky, but there was an edge to it, a tightness. Arthur sighed, picking up the menu. "Ronnie, can we just eat first? I promised you I'd sign it. The merger of our assets is happening. I just want to enjoy the Pinot Noir and the ribeye." "Of course, darling," Veronica said, leaning back. But Helen noticed something. Veronica's eyes didn't smile. Her mouth curved up, but her eyes remained cold, calculating, scanning the room like a predator, checking for traps. Helen poured the water. Arthur nodded a vague thanks without looking at her. Veronica ignored her entirely, her hand dropping to her purse on the seat beside her. "I'll have the 2015 Cabernet," Arthur told the sommelier who had materialized. "And bring 2 glasses. But, actually, bring the bottle. We're celebrating." "Excellent choice, Mr. Sterling." As Helen retreated to the shadows, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread in her stomach. She had grown up in a house full of secrets. Her father had been a grifter, a man who smiled while picking your pocket. She knew the look of a hustle. She knew the body language of someone who was waiting for the mark to look away. And Veronica Vane was practically vibrating with it. The dinner rush began in earnest. The kitchen was a cacophony of shouting chefs and clattering pans. But Helen kept one eye on table 4. The bottle of Cabernet had arrived. The sommelier poured the first taste for Arthur. He swirled, sniffed, and nodded. The glasses were filled, a deep, rich ruby red. "To us," Arthur said, raising his glass. "To the future," Veronica replied. They clinked glasses. Arthur took a sip, savoring it. Veronica took a tiny, performative sip, barely wetting her lips before setting the glass down. "Oh, Arthur," Veronica said suddenly, her hand flying to her chest. I think I left my phone in the coat check. I was expecting a call from my mother." "I can have the staff check," Arthur offered, starting to rise. No, sit," she insisted, her voice raising a pitch. "I'll just look in my clutch again. Maybe it fell under the table." She dropped her napkin. It fluttered to the floor near Arthur's feet. "I've got it," Arthur said, ever the gentleman. He bent down, disappearing beneath the rim of the table to retrieve the linen. It happened in less than 3 seconds. From her vantage point at the service station, Helen saw Veronica's hand move with the speed of a magician. She didn't reach for a phone. Her right hand darted into her purse, retrieved a small, clear vial, and flicked the cap off with her thumb. With a seamless motion, she hovered her hand over Arthur's wine glass. A fine white powder cascaded into the wine. It fizzed for a microsecond and then vanished, dissolving instantly into the dark vintage. By the time Arthur resurfaced, napkin in hand, Veronica's hands were folded innocently on the table, the vial gone. "Found it," she beamed, holding up a phone she had pulled from her pocket. "Silly me. It was in the side pocket all along." Arthur laughed, a hearty, unsuspecting sound. "You'd lose your head if it wasn't attached, Ronnie." "I suppose I would." She gestured to his glass. "Drink up, darling. You need to relax before the signing." Helen's heart hammered against her ribs. She froze, a tray of dirty dishes balanced on her shoulder. She knew what she had seen. It wasn't sugar. It wasn't sweetener. People didn't hide sweetener in their purses and dump it in secret while their fiancé was under the table. Arthur reached for the glass. "Do something," Helen's mind screamed. Drop a plate, scream, spill water on him. But if she caused a scene, she'd be fired. Who would believe her? A billionaire versus a waitress. Veronica would claim it was stevia. She'd sue. Helen would lose her job, her apartment, everything. Arthur's fingers curled around the stem of the glass. He lifted it. "Wait." Helen didn't say it. Her body moved before her brain caught up. She grabbed a fresh glass of water and a cloth napkin, rushing toward the table with a speed that bordered on reckless. As she reached the table, Arthur was inches from the rim. "Pardon me, sir," Helen said, her voice trembling slightly. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She deliberately stumbled. It was a controlled fall, one she had learned waiting tables for 7 years. She clipped the edge of the table with her hip, jarring it just enough. The wine glass in Arthur's hand wobbled. A few drops spilled onto the white tablecloth. "Careful," Veronica snapped, her eyes flashing with sudden, terrifying rage. "I am so terribly sorry," Helen gasped, setting her tray down on the side stand. I thought I saw a cork in your glass, sir. A piece of cork floating right on top." Arthur lowered the glass, frowning. "Cork? In a bottle of this quality?" "Yes, sir," Helen lied, her palms sweating. "I noticed it when I walked by. I couldn't let you drink that. Please, allow me." Before Arthur could protest, and before Veronica could stop her, Helen reached out. But she didn't take the glass away to dump it. That would be suspicious. Veronica would demand to see the cork. Instead, Helen did something incredibly risky. She picked up Arthur's glass in her right hand and Veronica's identical, nearly full glass in her left hand. She held them up to the light, squinting theatrically. "Ah, my mistake," Helen said, turning her back to the couple for just a fraction of a second as she faced the light of the chandelier. It was just a reflection. In that split second, with her body blocking their view, Helen crossed her wrists. It was a move she used to do with her father to entertain tourists in Times Square with 3-card Monty. The switch. She turned back around, uncrossing her hands, and set the glasses down. But she set Veronica's original glass in front of Arthur. And she set the poisoned glass in front of Veronica. "My apologies for the interruption," Helen said, bowing her head. "Please enjoy." She stepped back, her heart beating so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. It was done. She hadn't said a word about the poison. She hadn't accused anyone, she had simply let fate and a little sleight of hand decide the outcome. Arthur smiled, unbothered. "No harm done, miss. Thank you for your diligence." He picked up the glass, the safe glass, and took a long, deep swallow. "Ah," Arthur sighed. "Delicious. You really must try it, Veronica." Helen watched Veronica. The woman was staring at the glass in front of her, the glass that Helen had just placed there. Did she know? Did she see the switch? Veronica looked at Helen. Her eyes narrowed into slits. For a moment the mask slipped, and pure, unadulterated hatred poured out. She suspected, but she couldn't be sure. If she accused Helen of switching the drinks, she would have to explain why it mattered. If the drink was just wine, it shouldn't matter which glass was which. To refuse to drink her own wine would be an admission of guilt. "Come on, darling," Arthur urged, oblivious. "A toast, to the trust." Veronica's hand trembled as she reached for the glass. The poisoned chalice she had prepared for him was now sitting in her own manicured fingers. "To the trust," she whispered. She lifted the glass. Helen held her breath. "Drink it," she thought, "drink it and see what happens." Veronica brought the glass to her lips. She tilted it. The red liquid touched her mouth, and then she shattered the glass against the table. Crash! Red wine and shards of crystal exploded across the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh my God!" Veronica screamed, jumping up, clutching her chest. I saw a spider, in the glass. A spider." Arthur jumped up, startled. "A spider? In here?" "It was huge," Veronica cried, playing the damsel in distress perfectly. "It crawled right out of the wine. I panicked." She was good. She was terrifyingly good. She had destroyed the evidence in a tantrum of fake hysteria. The manager, a stout man named Mr. Henderson, came running over. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right?" "A spider, apparently," Arthur said, looking confused as he dabbed wine from his cuff. "Though I didn't see one." "It crawled away," Veronica insisted, breathing heavily. "I want a new table, now, and a new bottle." Mr. Henderson turned to Helen, his face purple with rage. "You, clean this up, immediately, and then go to my office." Helen dropped to her knees to begin picking up the shards of glass. As she reached for a large piece of the broken bowl, she saw it. A small residue. The wine hadn't fully washed away the powder on the bottom of the glass shard. It was a faint white paste clinging to the crystal. Helen palmed the shard, hiding it inside her apron pocket. "I'm sorry, sir," Helen whispered to the floor. As she stood up to leave, Veronica brushed past her. The woman leaned in close, her lips brushing Helen's ear. Her perfume was expensive, heavy, and suffocating. "I don't know who you are," Veronica hissed, her voice low enough that only Helen could hear. "But if you ever pull a stunt like that again, you won't just lose your job, you'll lose your life." Veronica pulled back, flashing a bright fake smile at Arthur. "Come, darling, let's go to the bar while they clean this mess." Arthur put his arm around Veronica. "Ideally, we should just sign the papers now, Ronnie, before any more excitement." "Yes," Veronica said, her eyes fixed on Helen's retreating back. "Let's go sign the papers." Helen walked into the kitchen, her hands shaking. She touched the sharp glass in her pocket. She had saved him from drinking it, but she hadn't saved him from her. Veronica was still going to get him to sign the papers, and once those papers were signed, once the assets were transferred, Veronica wouldn't need a sleeping pill or a heart attack inducer. She could kill him any way she wanted. Helen looked at the back exit. She could leave. She could run. It wasn't her business. But then she remembered Arthur's sad, hopeful eyes. "To the future," he had said. Helen took off her apron. She wasn't going to Mr. Henderson's office. She was going to follow them. The Chicago winter bit through Helen's thin waitress uniform like a mouthful of broken glass. She stood on the curb outside the Obsidian Room, hugging her arms to her chest, watching the taillights of Arthur Sterling's sleek black Maybach dissolve into the snowy traffic. She had been fired. Mr. Henderson hadn't even let her finish her shift. He'd ripped the apron off her, tossed $40 in cash at her feet, her severance, and told her if she ever stepped foot in the restaurant again, he'd call the cops. She had the shard of glass wrapped in a napkin in her pocket. It felt heavy, like a radioactive isotope. "Taxi!" Helen screamed, waving her hand frantically. A yellow cab screeched to a halt, splashing slush onto her worn sneakers. She dove inside. "Follow that Maybach up ahead," she said, pointing, "the black one with the diplomatic plates." The driver, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache named Igor, eyed her in the rearview mirror. "Lady, this isn't a movie. I need a destination." "Sterling Tower," Helen guessed. "Just go to Sterling Tower on Michigan Avenue. Fast. I'll give you 20 extra." It was a gamble, but a calculated one. Men like Arthur Sterling didn't go clubbing after a spider incident. They went home to their fortresses. As the cab wove through traffic, Helen pulled out her phone. She had an old iPhone with a cracked screen, but it still worked. She Googled white powder dissolves instantly in wine symptoms. The results were a terrifying cocktail of chemical names: cyanide, arsenic, ricin. But most didn't dissolve that fast or were tasteless. Then she found a forum post about foxglove derivatives and synthesized digitalis, heart attack mimics. Hard to trace if the victim had a history of heart issues. Did Arthur have a bad heart? She searched Arthur Sterling Health. A Forbes article from 2 years ago popped up. Tech mogul Sterling recovering from mild cardiac arrhythmia. Bingo, Helen whispered, a cold sweat breaking out on her neck. Veronica wasn't just poisoning him, she was exploiting a pre-existing condition. It would look like natural causes. A stress-induced heart attack right after signing a massive merger. The grieving widow would inherit the empire and the board of directors would move on within a week. "We're here," Igor grunted. The Sterling Tower pierced the night sky, a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to look down on the rest of the city with disdain. Helen threw the cash at the driver and scrambled out. She saw the tail end of the Maybach disappearing into the private underground garage. She couldn't follow them there. Security would stop her instantly. She had to use the front, but the doorman looked like he wrestled bears for a living. Helen ducked into the alleyway beside the building. She needed a way in. She looked up. The building was impenetrable, but every fortress has a service entrance. She saw a delivery truck idling near the loading dock. "Fresh linens," the side of the truck read. Helen's mind raced. She was still wearing her black button-down shirt and black slacks, the universal uniform of service staff everywhere. If she ditched her coat, she would freeze, but she would look like she belonged. She stripped off her coat, stashing it behind a dumpster. Shivering violently, she walked toward the loading dock with her head down, holding her phone to her ear as a prop. "Yeah, Mr. Henderson sent me," she said loudly to no one, walking with purpose. "He forgot the napkins for the penthouse catering. I'm running late." The guard at the loading dock bay was busy checking a clipboard. He glanced at her. "Delivery." "Sterling Penthouse," Helen said, not breaking stride. "Emergency catering supplement. Henderson will have my head if I'm not up there in 5. The guard looked at her shivering form, her black uniform, and the sheer panic in her eyes. Panic usually meant truth in his line of work. "Service elevator B. Badge is on the wall. Bring it back down." "Thanks." Helen grabbed a guest badge and sprinted for the elevator. As the doors closed, she slumped against the metal wall, her breath misting in the cold air. She was in. But now came the hard part. The penthouse was on the 90th floor, and once those doors opened, there would be no place to hide. The elevator climbed. Her ears popped. Ding! The doors slid open. Helen stepped out, not into a hallway, but directly into a foyer that was larger than her entire apartment building. The floor was marble, the walls were lined with modern art that probably cost millions, and the view of Chicago was breathtaking. But it was quiet. Too quiet. To her left, a grand staircase swept upward. To her right, a long corridor. She heard voices drifting from the corridor. "Can't believe you smashed the glass, Ronnie. That was a vintage bottle." Arthur's voice. He sounded tired, his words slightly slurring. "I told you, Arthur. I was terrified." Veronica's voice purred. "Besides, we have plenty of wine here. Let me pour you a drink, to settle your nerves before the lawyers arrive." Helen took off her shoes. She moved across the marble floor in her socks, silent as a ghost. She followed the voices to a set of double mahogany doors that were slightly ajar. She peeked inside. It was Arthur's study. A fire crackled in the hearth. Arthur was sitting in a leather armchair, looking pale. He was rubbing his left arm. a classic sign of heart distress. Veronica was at the wet bar in the corner. She had her back to Arthur. Helen watched in horror as Veronica pulled a second vial from her bra. She wasn't done, she was doubling the dose. Helen's instinct was to rush in, screaming. But the room was vast, and Veronica was closer to Arthur than Helen was. If Helen charged, Veronica could dump the powder, feign innocence, and call security. Helen was an intruder, a fired waitress. She had zero credibility. She needed proof. Undeniable proof. She pulled out her phone, switched it to video mode, and zoomed in. Her hand shook, but she steadied it against the doorframe. On the screen, she captured Veronica uncapping the vial. She captured the white powder falling into a crystal tumbler of scotch. She captured Veronica swirling the glass, watching the powder dissolve, a cruel, tight smirk playing on her lips. "Got you," Helen thought. "Here you go, darling," Veronica said, turning around. Her face transformed instantly from malice to concern. "Drink this. It's the 25-year Macallan. It'll help the circulation." Arthur reached for the glass with a trembling hand. "I don't know, Ronnie. I feel odd. My chest feels tight. Maybe I should call Dr. Evans." "Nonsense," Veronica soothed, moving closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's just panic, pre-commitment jitters. You're merging your company and your life tonight. It's natural. Just one sip. For me?" Arthur hesitated. The glass was inches from his lips. Helen knew she couldn't wait any longer. She had the video. Now she needed to save the man. "Don't drink it." Helen kicked the door open and stepped into the light. Arthur jumped, spilling a bit of the scotch on his trousers. Veronica spun around, her eyes widening in genuine shock, which quickly curdled into rage. "You," Veronica hissed. "How the hell did you get in here?" "Who is this?" Arthur asked, blinking. He looked from Helen to Veronica, confusion clouding his eyes. "Wait, you're the waitress. From the restaurant." "Sir, listen to me," Helen said, holding her phone up like a shield. "Do not drink that scotch. She put something in it. I saw her do it at the restaurant, and I just filmed her doing it again right now." "You're insane," Veronica snapped, stepping between Helen and Arthur. "Arthur, she's a stalker. She followed us. She must be deranged. I'm calling security." Veronica reached for the desk phone, but Helen shouted, "Check your wine glass, the one she smashed." That stopped Arthur. He looked up, his face grey. "What?" "At the restaurant," Helen said, speaking fast, desperate. "I switched the glasses. That's why she smashed hers. She knew she was about to drink the poison she meant for you. Ask yourself, Mr. Sterling, why would a woman who loves vintage wine smash a glass over a spider she never pointed out?" Arthur looked at Veronica. The fog in his brain seemed to clear for a second. "Ronnie, you said the spider was huge." "It was," Veronica cried, her voice shrill. "Arthur, don't listen to this trash. She's probably looking for a payout. Look at her. She's a servant." "I have it on video," Helen said, bluffing slightly. She had the pouring, but the angle was distant. "And I have the shard of glass from the restaurant in my pocket. It has residue. If the police test it, they'll find digitalis." The color drained from Veronica's face. The mention of the specific drug, digitalis, hit a nerve. Helen saw it. Arthur saw it too. "Digitalis," Arthur whispered. "My heart medication." "She knows about your condition," Helen pressed, stepping closer. "She's not trying to kill you violently, sir. She's trying to induce a heart attack so it looks like an accident. Tonight, before the prenup creates any barriers, but after the trust is signed." The room fell into a deadly silence. The only sound was the crackling fire and the wind howling against the penthouse windows. Arthur stood up, slowly. He was a tall man, and despite his illness, he carried the weight of a titan. He looked at the glass of scotch in his hand. Then he looked at the woman he was about to marry. "Give me the phone, Ronnie," Arthur said softly. "Arthur, no. Give me the damn phone," he roared, a sudden burst of energy returning to him. Veronica flinched. She stepped back, her back hitting the wet bar. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a weapon. "You don't understand," Veronica said, her voice dropping, losing the sweet facade. "It's too late, Arthur, even if you don't drink that." "What do you mean?" Arthur asked. Veronica looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. "It's 9:45. The papers were just a formality. The transfer was initiated digitally by your partner Simon 15 minutes ago. We didn't need your signature, we just needed your biometric key. Arthur frowned. My biometric key is on my ring. He looked down at his hand. The heavy signet ring he always wore, a family heirloom containing an NFC chip for high-level authorization, was gone. He gasped, clutching his hand. Where is my ring? You took it off in the car, Veronica smiled, a cold, predatory thing. To let me massage your hand, remember? You were so tired, so trusting. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. She tossed it in the air and caught it. Simon has already emptied the operational accounts, Arthur. The company is being gutted as we speak. This, she gestured to the scotch, was just a mercy, to save you the humiliation of watching your empire burn. Helen felt a knot of nausea. It wasn't just murder, it was a heist, a corporate assassination. Simon, Arthur swayed, grabbing the desk for support. Simon built this company with me. He wouldn't. Simon has gambling debts, darling. Massive ones. And I, Veronica stepped forward, emboldened by her victory. I'm just the closer. She looked at Helen. And you're just collateral damage. Veronica pulled a small, sleek pistol from beneath the wet bar counter. It was a silencer-equipped pistol, likely Arthur's own, kept for protection. She leveled it at Helen's chest. Put the phone down, Veronica commanded, and kick it over to me. Helen's hands trembled. She slowly lowered the phone. She had played her hand, but she hadn't anticipated the gun. Or the betrayal of the partner. Do it, Veronica screamed. Helen bent down to place the phone on the floor. I'm sorry, Arthur, Helen whispered. Arthur looked broken, not by the poison, but by the betrayal. He slumped into his chair, wheezing. Don't be sorry, kid, Arthur wheezed. You tried. Veronica kicked the phone away and aimed the gun at Arthur's head. I really did want it to be a heart attack, Arthur. Clean, simple, but a murder-suicide works too. Deranged waitress breaks in, kills tycoon, then gets shot by grieving fiancé. The tabloids will eat it up. She cocked the hammer. Goodbye, Arthur. Helen squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bang, but the bang didn't come. Instead, a loud mechanical whirring sound filled the room. Click-clack. The heavy mahogany doors to the study suddenly locked automatically. Metal shutters slammed down over the windows with a deafening crash, sealing the room in steel. Veronica spun around, startled. What is that? Arthur Sterling was no longer slumping. He was sitting up straight, his hand pressing a hidden button under the lip of his desk. The panic button that most billionaires installed but rarely used. That, Arthur said, his voice grim but steady, is the Fortress Protocol. Nothing goes in or out of this room, and the ventilation has just been sealed. Open it, Veronica screamed, aiming the gun at him again. Open it, or I swear to God. You can shoot me, Arthur said calmly, staring down the barrel of the gun. But the moment this protocol activates, a silent alarm goes to the FBI and my private security team. They are already breaching the elevator. And this room? He pointed to the vents. This room is oxygen scrubbed. In about 4 minutes, we're all going to pass out. If you shoot me, you die in here with my corpse. If you don't, you go to prison. Arthur looked at Helen. Get under the desk, kid. It's got an emergency oxygen supply. Helen didn't hesitate. She dove for the desk. Veronica stood frozen, the gun wavering. The sound of heavy boots thudding on the marble floor outside became audible. Police, federal agents, drop the weapon. A voice boomed through the reinforced door. Veronica looked at the door, then at Arthur, then at the gun. She realized the checkmate. She dropped the gun. It clattered uselessly on the expensive rug. Arthur exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. He looked down at Helen, who was peering out from under the knee-hole of the desk. You have terrible timing, Arthur said to her, a faint smile ghosting his lips. But you have excellent instincts. Helen managed a weak smile back. I'll take that as a compliment, sir. But as the police began to drill through the locks, Helen knew the story wasn't over. Simon was still out there. The money was moving, and Veronica was just one head of the Hydra. Arthur Sterling had survived the drink. Now he had to survive the truth. The steel shutters of the penthouse retracted with a groan. revealing the flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers reflected against the Chicago skyline. The room, once a sanctuary of wealth, now smelled of ozone, fear, and the lingering scent of Veronica's heavy perfume. Helen crawled out from under the mahogany desk, her knees shaking. She watched as two federal agents hauled Veronica Vane to her feet. The socialite's face was a mask of ruined mascara and pure venom. "You're making a mistake," Veronica shrieked, thrashing against the cuffs. "I am a victim here. That girl broke in." Arthur Sterling stood by the window, his back to the commotion. He didn't look at Veronica. He looked at the city he had helped build, his reflection in the glass, looking older, grayer than it had 10 minutes ago. "Take her away," Arthur said, his voice flat, "and find the ring." She threw it somewhere on the rug. As the agents dragged Veronica out, she locked eyes with Helen. "You think you saved him?" she spat, a manic grin splitting her face. "You just prolonged the pain. Simon has already won. You're both broke." The heavy oak doors slammed shut, leaving Helen and Arthur alone in the wreckage of the study. Arthur walked over to his computer terminal. His hands, usually steady enough to solder a microchip, were trembling. He typed in a manual override code. "Access denied," the robotic voice of the system declared. "Damn it," Arthur cursed, slamming his fist on the desk. "She wasn't lying. Simon locked me out of the mainframe. He's using the master key from my ring to authorize a total liquidity transfer to the Caymans." Helen stepped forward, smoothing her wrinkled uniform. "Who is Simon?" Arthur looked up, as if surprised she was still there. "Simon is my oldest friend. We started Sterling Systems in a garage 30 years ago. He's the CTO. He built the security architecture. If he's turned on me, he knows every backdoor, every loophole." Arthur stared at the screen. A progress bar was pulsing red in the center of the monitor. "Asset migration, 65% complete." 65%, Arthur muttered. "That's $4 billion already gone. In 20 minutes, the company will be a hollow shell. Thousands of employees, pensions, all gone." He slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I can't stop it remotely. He's cut the external access." Helen looked at the screen, then at the defeated billionaire. She thought about the tips she scraped together to pay rent. She thought about her dad, who always said, "The only way to beat a rigged game is to kick over the table." "If you can't stop it remotely," Helen said, her voice cutting through the silence, "then you have to pull the plug, literally." Arthur looked up. "What?" "The servers," Helen said. "They have to be physical things, right? Boxes with wires. If you can't hack them, turn them off, smash them, whatever you have to do." Arthur's eyes widened. A spark of life returned to them. "The cold storage facility. It's in the basement of the headquarters downtown. It's an air-gapped system, but Simon must have bridged it to the internet to do the transfer. If I can get to the server room, I can activate the electromagnetic kill switch. It would fry the hard drives, but it would stop the money from leaving." He checked his watch. "But we have to get across town in 15 minutes in a snowstorm." Arthur grabbed his coat. He looked at Helen. "I don't even know your name." "Helen. Helen Jenkins." "Helen," Arthur said, buttoning his coat. "You saw the poison when no one else did. You saw the glass switch. You have eyes that see what people are trying to hide. I need those eyes tonight. Simon is smart, but he's arrogant. He might have traps. Will you come with me?" It was insane. She should go home. She should call her mom. But looking at Arthur, she realized this wasn't just about money for him. It was about his life's work. And she had already come this far. "Let's go," Helen said. They didn't take the elevator. They took the private stairwell to the garage. The Maybach was gone, police evidence now, so Arthur ran toward a dusty, tarp-covered shape in the corner. He pulled the tarp off to reveal a vintage 1969 Ford Mustang, black on black. "My first car," Arthur said, the ghost of a smile appearing. "No GPS, no tracking chips. Simon won't see us coming." The engine roared to life, echoing off the concrete walls. Helen buckled in. Arthur gunned the engine, and they peeled out of the garage, drifting onto the snowy streets of Chicago. The race was on. The drive was a blur of white snow and red taillights. Arthur drove with a focused intensity, weaving through traffic with a skill that belied his age. My father was a con artist, Helen said suddenly, gripping the dashboard handle as Arthur swerved around a bus. Excuse me, Arthur asked, eyes on the road. You asked how I saw the poison, Helen explained. My dad. He taught me the hustle. The 3-card Monte. The switch. He taught me that people only look at what you want them to see. Veronica, she was too perfect. That's the tell. When something is too perfect, it's a distraction. Arthur tightened his grip on the steering wheel. I was the mark, he said bitterly. I built a fortress to keep enemies out, but I invited the enemy to dinner and asked her to marry me. Love makes you blind, Mr. Sterling, Helen said softly. It doesn't make you stupid. It just makes you human. Arthur glanced at her, surprised by the wisdom in her tired voice. Call me Arthur. They screeched to a halt in front of the Sterling Systems headquarters. It was a glass spire, dark and imposing. The lobby lights were off. The security gates were down. Power is out, Arthur noted. Simon cut the grid to bypass the alarms. He's inside. They ran to the side entrance. Arthur punched a code into the keypad. Nothing. The electronic lock was dead. Stand back, Arthur ordered. He went to the trunk of the Mustang and pulled out a tire iron. With a grunt of exertion, he smashed the glass panel of the door. The safety glass shattered into thousands of diamonds on the snow. They crunched through the debris and entered the lobby. It was eerie, the silence of a corporate tomb. The server room is on the sub-level, Arthur whispered. B2, we have to take the stairs. They descended into the darkness, lit only by the flashlights on their phones. The air grew colder as they went underground. The hum of machinery grew louder, the sound of the servers working overtime, processing the massive theft. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy steel door blocked their path. Server farm, authorized personnel only. Arthur tried the handle, locked. He's in there, Arthur whispered. I can hear the cooling fans running at max capacity. How do we get in? Helen asked. I have a key, Arthur said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a physical key, an old-fashioned brass one. I kept the original manual locks on this door, sentimental value. Simon probably forgot about that. He slid the key in. It turned with a satisfying click. Arthur pushed the door open. The room was bathed in an eerie blue light from the blinking LEDs of hundreds of server racks. The noise was deafening, a drone of fans and hard drives. In the center of the room, sitting at the main terminal, was a man. He was younger than Arthur, maybe late 40s, wearing a hoodie and expensive sneakers. He was typing furiously. Hello, Simon, Arthur said, his voice booming over the hum of the machines. The man spun around on his chair. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. Arthur, Simon sighed, checking his watch. You're early. I expected the police to keep you busy with Veronica's hysterics for at least another hour. She's in custody, Simon. It's over. Is it? Simon pointed to the massive screen on the wall. Migration, 89%. I'd say I'm winning. Even if you arrest me, the money is gone. Encrypted, untraceable. I'll spend 5 years in a minimum security prison and come out a billionaire. Arthur stepped forward, the tire iron still in his hand. Stop the transfer. Simon laughed, standing up. He was taller than Arthur and fit. He pulled a taser from his belt. I don't think so, old friend. You see, I anticipated you might try to play the hero. That's why I'm not alone. From the shadows of the server racks, 2 large men stepped out. They wore private security uniforms, Arthur's own security guards, turned traitor. Money buys loyalty, Arthur, Simon sneered. You of all people should know that. Arthur hesitated. He was outnumbered and outgunned. He looked at Helen. Run, he whispered. No, Helen said. She didn't move. Her eyes were scanning the room. She wasn't looking at the men. She was looking at the environment. The server room. It was a specific kind of environment. She noticed 2 things. First, the floor was a raised grid designed for airflow with removable tiles. Second, above the main terminal where Simon stood, a massive pipe ran across the ceiling. It was labeled Liquid Nitrogen Cooling System. Get him, Simon ordered the guards. The guards lunged. Arthur, duck, Helen screamed. She didn't run away. She ran toward the wall, grabbing a heavy fire extinguisher mounted there. Arthur ducked instinctively. The first guard missed him, stumbling. Helen didn't aim for the guards, she aimed for the pipe above Simon's head. "Hey!" Simon shouted, realizing too late what she was doing. Helen swung the heavy canister with all her strength. It clanged against the pipe, once, twice. On the third strike, the valve sheared off. Hiss! A plume of supercooled liquid nitrogen exploded from the pipe, creating an instant curtain of freezing white fog. "Ah!" Simon screamed as the freezing gas hit the computer terminal. The liquid nitrogen didn't just freeze the air, it poured directly onto the main console, the console controlling the transfer. Electronics and supercooling fluids don't mix when exposed violently. Spark, pop. The terminal exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. The screen on the wall flickered. Migration paused. Connection lost. "You idiot!" Simon roared, backing away from the freezing cloud, coughing. "You fried the interface." The sudden chaos confused the guards. The room was filling with dense, freezing fog. Visibility dropped to 0. "Helen," Arthur called out, blind in the fog. "I'm here." Helen's voice came from the left. "The floor tiles, pull them up." Arthur understood instantly. The guards were rushing blindly through the fog toward where they had last seen them. Arthur dropped to his knees and yanked up 2 of the floor tiles, creating a gaping hole in the raised floor. He scrambled back just as the first guard came charging through the mist. Crash! The guard's foot found empty air. He fell face first, his shin slamming against the metal edge of the floor, knocking the wind out of him. The second guard hesitated, swinging his baton wildly in the smoke. Helen emerged from the fog like a phantom. She still held the fire extinguisher. She swung it low, sweeping the second guard's legs. He toppled over, landing on top of his partner in the pit. "The kill switch," Helen yelled. "Do it now." Arthur scrambled toward the far wall, past the sparking, ruined terminal. Simon was there, frantically trying to type on a backup keyboard, his fingers numb from the cold. "No," Simon yelled, tackling Arthur. The 2 men hit the ground. Simon was younger and stronger, but Arthur was fighting for his life. Simon punched Arthur in the jaw, dazing him. "I built this," Simon screamed, grabbing Arthur by the lapels. "I deserve this." Arthur reached out, his hand groping for purchase. His fingers closed around a loose cable from the destroyed server rack. A high-voltage power cable. "You built it," Arthur gasped, spitting blood. "But I own it." Arthur jammed the live cable into the metal frame of the server rack Simon was leaning against. Zap! A localized shockwave threw Simon backward. It wasn't lethal, but it was enough to convulse his muscles and knock him unconscious. He slumped to the floor, twitching. Arthur scrambled up, bruised and bleeding. He reached the red lever on the wall encased in glass. Emergency shutdown. He shattered the glass with his elbow and pulled the lever down. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The sound of heavy breakers tripping echoed through the room. The lights died completely. The hum of the servers stopped. The blue LEDs faded to black. The room went silent, save for the hissing of the remaining nitrogen. Arthur pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, but it glowed in the dark. Transfer failed. Funds reverted to source. Arthur let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. Helen limped over to him. She had a cut on her forehead, and her uniform was covered in white frost. "Did we win?" she asked, shivering. Arthur held up the phone screen. "We won." He looked at her in the dim light of the phone. "You just saved $4 billion with a fire extinguisher." "And a little physics," Helen smiled weakly. "Liquid nitrogen expands rapidly, makes for a good distraction." Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting closer. The police had finally caught up. Arthur reached out and took Helen's hand. "Helen, you're fired." Helen's heart dropped. "What?" "You're fired from that diner," Arthur said, squeezing her hand. "As of tomorrow, you're the new head of corporate security for Sterling Systems. Starting salary is $200,000 a year, plus bonuses." Helen stared at him. I don't have any qualifications." Arthur looked at the unconscious Simon, the trapped guards, and the destroyed server room. "You have the only qualification that matters," Arthur said. "Loyalty and the ability to spot a rat." Helen laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "I'll take the job. But as the police flashlight beams began to cut through the smoke at the door, Arthur's expression hardened. "There's just one thing left," he said quietly. "What?" Veronica and Simon were working together, but Simon mentioned debts, massive gambling debts. People like Simon don't just owe casinos, they owe dangerous people, the kind of people who don't care if the transfer failed. Arthur looked at the darkness of the open door. "This isn't over, Helen. We stopped the theft, but now we have a target on our backs." The victory was sweet, but the night wasn't over. The shadows held one final secret. The fallout was swift and brutal, but this time Arthur Sterling wasn't the victim. Federal agents swarmed the server room. Simon, shivering and defeated, gave up everything before the handcuffs were even fully clicked shut. To save his own skin from the dangerous creditors he owed, he turned state's witness, exposing a network of corporate espionage that implicated 3 other tech firms and, damningly, Veronica Vane. Veronica was arrested in the penthouse, still screaming that she was the future Mrs. Sterling. The footage Helen had captured on her cracked iPhone, showing the powder being poured, was the final nail in her coffin. The spider defense didn't hold up against toxicology reports finding digitalis residue in her purse. 6 months later, the mid-afternoon sun shone through the windows of the Obsidian Room. It was the same restaurant where it had all begun, but the atmosphere felt different today. Lighter, Helen Jenkins walked through the front door. She wasn't wearing a stained apron or comfortable shoes for a double shift. She was wearing a tailored navy blazer, her hair styled sharply, holding a tablet with the confidence of an executive. She walked past the host stand. The new manager, a polite woman who had replaced the tyrannical Mr. Henderson, nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, Ms. Jenkins. Mr. Sterling is waiting at table 4. Helen approached the table. Arthur was there. He looked 10 years younger. The grey pallor of heart disease and stress was gone, replaced by a healthy glow. He was drinking sparkling water. "You're late," Arthur teased, checking his watch. "I thought my head of security was supposed to be punctual." Helen slid into the booth opposite him, the same booth where she had once invisibly poured water while he was being poisoned. "I was checking the perimeter," Helen smiled, placing her tablet down, "and I was reviewing the background checks on the new board members. You'll be happy to know none of them have secret gambling debts or vials of poison in their pockets." Arthur chuckled. "That is a relief." They ordered lunch. When the bill came, Arthur reached for it out of habit. "No," Helen said, putting her hand over the check. "Helen, please, I'm the billionaire." "And I'm the one who owes you," Helen said seriously. "You didn't just give me a job, Arthur. You gave me a life. My dad, he was a grifter, yeah. But he always wanted me to use my sight for something better than 3-card Monte. You gave me that chance." Arthur pulled his hand back. He looked at the young woman who had gone from clearing his crumbs to saving his empire. "You saved my life, Helen. I think that covers the tab for eternity." "Let me buy lunch," she insisted. "Consider it a tip." Arthur smiled, a genuine warm expression that reached his eyes. "All right, lunch is on you." Helen handed her card to the waiter, a young man who looked tired and overworked, much like she had been. "Keep the change," Helen told the waiter, writing a generous tip on the receipt. "And hang in there, you never know who's sitting at your tables." As they walked out onto the snowy Chicago street, Arthur Sterling and Helen Jenkins looked less like a tycoon and his employee and more like a father and daughter. They had survived the poison, the lies, and the greed. They stepped into the waiting car, ready to face whatever the world threw at them next. But this time, they were watching each other's backs. Arthur Sterling's story is a terrifying reminder that the greatest dangers often hide behind the most beautiful smiles. He had built a fortress to protect his wealth, but he had left the front door open to the one person he thought he could trust. It took Helen, a woman invisible to the world of the elite, to see the truth. Her story teaches us that intuition is a survival instinct we should never ignore. Whether it's a spider in a wine glass or a deal that seems too good to be true, sometimes the smallest details are the difference between life and death. In a world full of Veronicas and Simons, be a Helen. Watch the hands, not the smile. What a roller coaster. I honestly got chills when Helen smashed that nitrogen pipe. Now I want to ask you, if you were Helen and you saw someone poisoning a drink, would you have intervened, Or would you have been too scared to lose your job? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more of these dramatic, real-life stories to you. Don't forget to hit the bell notification so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.